Professor Chair, Provost ASA, Provost of the College of Humanities, Deans and Directors, Togbeo Mamao, invited guests, colleague lecturers, students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon or evening to you. I'm delighted to be here today to present to you my research works over the years. I would like to share a few of the things that I've done over the past few years. And my topic for presentation is When Life Becomes Unbearable, Dynamics and Complexities of Suicidal Behavior and Prevention in a Cultural Context. Madam Chair, life brings along several challenges which we have to deal with on a daily basis. For example, there are issues of loss of a loved one, embarrassment, disgrace, not being able to provide for one's family, relationship issues, feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, illness, and many more. Most people easily sail through these life challenges by employing good coping mechanisms to deal with the situation. However, for a few, the challenges and associated pain become so unbearable that decisions are taken either at the spur of the moment or after days of contemplating what steps to take. Either way, a few individuals may end up taking their lives, or they contemplate suicide, and some indeed carry out the act of killing themselves. Madam Chair, my research work over the years covers two main areas. First is my work on suicidal behavior in a cultural context, and second is my research on gender. However, a major part of my work focuses on suicide and suicide prevention. My interest in suicide research began when one of my friends lost a family member to suicide. The pain with which she narrated the story to me ignited a desire in me to try to understand what really happens for people to take that option. My aim was to understand suicidal behavior, which is largely influenced by social, cultural, biological, and psychological factors. My objectives were to explore this behavior, to search for meanings, motivations, attitudes towards suicide, and to explore how persons who attempt suicide cope with the stigma that is attached to the behavior. As a social and community psychologist, I believe that I could use this understanding to promote quality of life and help design interventions that will help prevent suicide in our communities. Together with colleagues from Norway and Uganda, we embarked on this research journey in 2008, and we have published several papers on suicidal behavior in a cultural context. Madam Chair, many people do not understand why I chose this area of research. Anytime I interact with others, whether it is among friends or in a scientific community, and I'm asked about my research area, and I tell them I do suicide research, the interjection that follows is, why suicide? They often wonder why, of all the research areas in psychology, I would decide to settle on such an apparently negative topic. Why not happiness, love, joy, or any other positive area in psychology? I have often been asked. Indeed, I was once invited by a research group in one of the universities in Germany for a research project meeting. They were interested in having me join a research project on eating behavior, which basically focuses on why people eat what they eat and how they eat it. So at the meeting, each member presented research they were working on. I was the last presenter, and the coordinator, who knew about my suicide research, then introduced me as follows. After having all these presentations on something that gives life, let us now have a presentation from Professor Charity Akotia from Ghana, who will present on something that takes life. This made everyone laugh, but then I was already used to hearing why suicide, so I was not bothered. However, It is important to know that doing suicide research does not imply that you are doing research on the darkest area of life or that your type of research takes life. Rather, suicide research helps us understand why people take these options when they have psychological pain or have what is called psych ache. Well, often I use the slightest opportunity I get to educate others on why I do suicide research. My retort to the question why suicide is to save lives. The more I engage in suicide research, the more it dawns on me that there is so much out there to learn about the behavior and that we need to delve some more into research so that we can provide the needed support to others. As a social and community psychologist, my work is guided by values and principles of the field, key among them being understanding behavior in context, promoting community-wide mental health, and preventing social and community problems from occurring. It is important to know that although suicide is a universal phenomenon, there is no universally agreed upon definition of the behavior. However, the World Health Organization defines suicide as the act of deliberately killing oneself. Sneidman, the father of suicide research, indicated that the suicidal person must be understood as being in a state of complicated crisis based on psychological needs. This he referred to as psych ache. Sneidman defines psych ache as an acute state of intense psychological pain associated with feelings of guilt, anguish, fear, panic, loneliness, and helplessness. The primary source of severe psych ache, according to Sneidman, is frustrated psychological needs. Thus, psych ache is the mental pain of being perturbed, and according to Sneidman, it is an important influencing factor that triggers suicide. Attempted suicide is a conscious and intended act carried out to harm oneself. In an attempted suicide, though there is the intention of death, the act does not result in death. Attempted suicide can have serious consequences for the individual and for the family the person belongs to. According to WHO Report 2021 on suicide, for every suicide there are at least 20 suicide attempts. And research shows that the lives of at least 6 people are intimately and directly changed forever due to bereavement by suicide, and no less than 135 people are affected by exposure to each suicide. It is noteworthy that self-inflicted injuries represent a heavy burden on countries' social and economic system. Madam Chair, experience from suicide research reveals that many suicides and suicide attempts go unreported by families, which imply that the recorded figures we have may actually be a gross underestimation of the actual occurrences. This is quite alarming, as even one suicide attempt or death is already too many to contain, especially knowing that such death is preventable. Madam Chair, a combination of situations and factors lead people to consider suicide. Risk factors increase the possibility of suicide, but they might not be the direct causes. Risk factors have been identified at various levels, including the individual, community, and societal levels. For example, the link between suicide and mental disorders, in particular depression and alcohol use disorders, has been well established in high-income countries. In low and middle-income countries, however, research has shown that many suicides occur as a result of social-cultural factors, including existential issues, inability to deal with life stresses, such as financial problems, cultural expectations of men and women in society, relationship breakups, chronic pain and illness, loss of a loved one, unemployment, etc. However, research shows that suicide attempts is the strongest precursor to suicide. In other words, an attempt to end one's life is the strongest predictor that the behavior will occur again and that individuals will die by suicide. Madam Chair, the statistic on suicide is staggering. According to the WHO report, in 2021, about 700 people take their own lives every year, and there are many more people who attempt suicide. It is important to know that every suicide is a tragedy that affects families, communities, and entire societies, and has long-lasting effects on the people left behind. Suicide is not limited to any age group, as it occurs throughout the lifespan. In 2019, suicide was the fourth leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds globally. Suicide occurs in both high-income as well as low and middle-income countries. In the WHO 2019 report, it was estimated that over 77% of global suicides occurred in low and middle-income countries. This is alarming and must be taken seriously. Madam Chair, in Ghana, though there are no accurate national figures or official statistics on suicide, we still work with some figures. For example, in 2020, WHO report indicates that there were about 1,993 suicide deaths with suicide rate of 10.54 per 100,000 people. Kwashi et al. In 2020 also indicated that 1 in every adolescent in second cycle schools in Ghana engages in self-harm. And the Ghana Health Service 2021 report indicates a 4-year suicide attempt trend in Ghana, which showed that in 2018, there were 707 suicide attempts. In 2019, there were 880 suicide attempts. In 2020, there were 777 suicide attempts. And in 2021, up till June, there were 417 attempts. But why study suicide in a cultural context? Why do we need to do that? Madam Chair, it is imperative to highlight why it is important to study the behavior in a cultural context. It is noteworthy to mention that scholars have often neglected the role played by culture in suicidal behavior. Colucci, 2012, alluded that usually suicide is a phenomenon across cultures, and theories postulated in one region are assumed to be universal. Thus, except for a few researchers on suicide, such as Douglas and Bowles, 1988, many researchers have neglected the cultural meaning of suicide. Colucci argued that cultural meanings of suicide are key in understanding suicide. And according to Good and Good, an illness involves the metaphors associated with a disease, the ethnomedical theories, the basic values and conceptual forms, and the care patterns that shape the experience of the illness and the social reactions to the sufferer. Thus, the importance of cultural understandings of suicide is depicted in this quote. Madam Chair, there is still a lot we need to know, we do not know, about the meaning of suicidal behavior. In an article titled The Meaning of Suicide, Implications for Research, Bowles, 1988, recommends that in order to develop valid social scientific theories, of course, suicidologists must make a paradigmatic shift from the prevailing universal invariant definition of suicide to systematic research into culture-specific meanings of suicide. Others have also pointed out that we need to obtain a broader view of human behavior than what has so far been provided by Western-based and ethnocentric generalizations, and that we need to be cautious in transposing research from one country to another. Generally, suicidal behavior varies from culture to culture in terms of methods used, demographic characteristics such as age, sex, reasons, and motivations for engaging in the behavior. Researchers who do culturally relevant suicide research have noticed cultural differences in the patterns of suicide when comparing Western educated, rich, and highly industrialized and non-Western countries. For example, age distribution and male to female ratio are different, with higher rates in the elderly in Western countries, but highest rates in young people in Asia and Africa. Additionally, Vijayakumar et al. Found that being female, living in a rural area, and holding religious beliefs that sanction suicide pose higher risks than the same factors are in Western countries. This may be counterintuitive, but it is true. Various researchers have added their voice to the call for a cultural understanding of suicide. For example, Yemelan in 2010 argued that sociocultural context in which behavior occurs is crucial to people's lives, which inevitably means that it also plays a crucial role in suicidal behavior. So then, if you want to understand suicidal behavior and people experiencing suicidal tendencies, it is essential to take the cultural context into consideration in all kinds of suicidological research. Sen indicated that though suicide is a personal act, it is very much socioculturally shaped and susceptible to sociocultural factors. Various researchers have postulated theories about the relationship between culture and psychopathology. For example, Sen in 2001 theorized on the effects of culture on suicidal behavior. He identified various effects of culture on suicide, though his applications suggest that suicide is a pathology. It must be clearly stated that suicide is not a pathology but a behavior. Sen highlighted 5 effects of culture on suicide, and these are: 1, the pathogenetic effects of culture, where culture contributes to the nature and severity of the distress that people may suffer. 2, pathoselective effects of culture, where a person chooses suicide over other possible solutions to a problem. 3, pathoplastic effects of suicide, where we have special forms of suicide in addition to individual suicide, such as group suicide, family suicide, and mass suicide. 4, pathofacilitative effects of suicide, where there is variations in the frequency and rates of suicide among different societies. And lastly, the pathoreactive effects of suicide, where many societies exhibit very negative attitudes towards suicidal behavior. For example, suicide is seen as a crime in some countries, including Ghana. There are variations even in how suicide is construed and defined. In 2008, Lester provided several examples of the varied definitions of suicide by cultures. According to him, the Mohave, which is a Native American tribe, would ascribe a fetus which presents itself in the transverse position for birth, leading to its own death and that of its mother to suicide. That it was intentional so that the mother and child can be together in the spirit world. This, in many other cultures, will be perceived as stillborn. From this, we can see clearly that culture indeed plays a very significant role in understanding suicide. Though there are some dynamics when we mention suicide, the phenomenon has always existed in all cultures all over the world. Madam Chair, there is much variation in suicide rates in countries that report suicide. However, we do not have many African countries reporting on suicide, and this makes it very difficult to have relevant and reliable statistics that will help us understand the patterns and dynamics of suicide and to aid interventions. As mentioned earlier in this paper, together with some colleagues from Norway and Uganda, we embarked on a research project to understand the cultural meanings of suicide. We started our research with attitude studies. According to Oskamp and Scott, attitude studies generally provide a useful gateway to study the meaning of suicide, largely because attitudes help people to understand their world, and they often express an individual's basic values. Suicide is indeed a cultural artifact, in that no one kills himself or herself without reference to the prevailing normative standards and attitudes of a cultural community. Studying attitudes towards suicide is one of the several gateways in developing an understanding of the meanings of suicide in different cultures. It is also generally contended that attitudes towards suicide are important because they affect the willingness of healthcare staff and or the willingness of people in general to intervene in a suicidal crisis or help those who deliberately harm themselves. Moreover, attitudes affect both the content and efficiency of interventions and treatment. Madam Chair, permit me now to highlight some studies that, together with my research team, we have conducted over the years to understand the cultural meanings of suicide. The very first paper we published on attitudes towards suicide was in 2008. This was a cross-national study conducted in Ghana, Uganda, and Norway, with the main purpose of understanding self-reported suicidal behavior and attitudes towards suicide and suicide prevention among psychology students in Ghana and Uganda, and then to compare them with each other and with a country from a Western world, which is Norway. Thus, in Ghana and Uganda, where virtually nothing officially was done or has been done to prevent suicide, the results of this study may be useful as a starting point in putting the issues on the agenda and initiating suicide preventing efforts. We chose psychology students both because they are future key persons in helping suicidal persons and working in suicide prevention, and also they are comparable to other countries with regard to age and level of education. We found differences between the three countries in attitudes towards suicide, which emphasizes the need for culture-sensitive risk, not just result in negative attitudes, but also condemnatory attitudes. Madam Chair, in our efforts to help prevent suicide, teenagers' perceptions about the causes and prevention of suicide is imperative. This is because, as indicated earlier, a high percentage of persons who engage in suicidal behavior are adolescents. Their views are important as they will help us design appropriate suicide prevention programs for their age group. Hence, we explore the perception of teenagers on suicidal behavior more generally. Using qualitative methods, participants were asked to respond to three questions. Why do people kill themselves? What words will you use to describe suicidal persons, and how can suicide be prevented? Responses revealed that participants ascribed the causes of suicide mainly to intrapersonal factors, such as personal shortcomings and perceived obstacles, followed by interpersonal causes, such as lack of social support and broken-heartedness. We also found that participants were judgmental about suicidal persons, and they ascribed negative words to those who killed themselves. For example, they thought that they were murderers or they were cowards. Despite this, they held the belief that suicide is preventable. Madam Chair, health professionals in accident and emergency units are also extremely important when suicide attempt results in some serious injury that requires admissions for intensive care. Primary care and specialist settings are therefore important health-seeking avenues, which also present opportunities for early identification and assessment for at-risk clinical population, such as suicidal persons. Their attitudes are therefore critical as they determine whether they will be willing to help or not. Additionally, the attitudes of these health professionals towards suicide and suicidal patients therefore become important to investigate, as they may predict future behavior towards suicidal patients and perhaps interfere with the healthy working relationship between the health professional and the patient. Based on this, we explored the attitudes of physicians and nurses towards suicide and suicide prevention. We found that health professionals in our study view suicide as a considerable public health problem in Ghana, arising from psychosocial crisis rather than psychiatric illnesses. However, while majority of physicians view suicide as an existential crisis, most of the nurses viewed it as a moral infraction. 3 key attitudes towards suicide and the suicidal patient were observed: stable attitude, dissonant attitude, and transition attitude. These findings have important implications for training of health professionals in suicide prevention in Ghana. Madam Chair, generally, in resource-poor settings with limited mental health workforce, community leaders become gatekeepers, assisting community members with challenges. Indeed, in other parts of the world, community leaders are school staff, religious leaders, family and clan health who be engaged in suicide prevention. Thus, community leaders can function as gatekeepers for persons experiencing mental health issues in the community and as defenders of moral norms and legal codes against suicidal behaviors. So we explored the attitudes of community leaders in rural Ghana towards suicide and suicide prevention in a study. This study was an attempt to understand their attitudes towards suicide and their perceptions towards the behavior and how it can be prevented. We interviewed 10 community leaders in rural Ghana. We observed that community leaders in our study held 2 conflicting views about suicide. On the one hand, they perceived suicide as a health crisis, and on the other hand, they viewed it as a taboo. The community leaders also viewed reasons for suicide as more of psychosocial strain than psychiatric factors. We noted, however, that despite the perception of suicide as a moral transgression, community leaders were ready and willing to provide support for persons in suicidal crisis and as much as possible avoided condemnatory attitudes towards them. These findings are quite revealing and informative regarding the roles of gatekeepers in the community and what should be emphasized and supported to help ease the tension on individuals who exhibit suicidal tendencies. Madam Chair, so far, the studies I have highlighted can be described as attitudes shaped by the cultural context. However, beyond the cultural context is the legal context. In Ghana, suicide attempt is legally prohibited, and in fact, it is a crime to engage in suicide attempt. The 1960 Criminal Code Act 29, Section 57 states that whoever attempts to commit suicide shall be guilty of misdemeanor. There is evidence, Madam Chair, that this law is enforced and that in some cases, suicide attempters are prosecuted and sentenced to penalties ranging from monetary fines to imprisonment for up to 3 years. However, the World Health Organization has encouraged countries still criminalizing suicidal behavior to decriminalize the act, since suicidal behavior is a mental health issue, and suicidal persons should therefore get help rather than be punished. Currently, suicide is no longer a punishable offense in the Nordic countries, the western part of Europe, and some states in the United States. However, in most countries in Africa, suicide attempt remains a punishable offense. In 2014, we conducted a study among police officers and health personnel to explore their views on this law, which we believe will provide culture-sensitive arguments to aid in abolishing the law. We found that majority of our respondents did not agree with the law criminalizing attempted suicide in Ghana. The main argument for not agreeing with the law was that suicidal behavior is a mental health issue. Arguments for agreeing with the law were that people have no right to take their lives and that the law has a deterrent effect, and thus it will help reduce the rate of suicide. Those who argued in favor of the law did not seem to reflect much on the reasons for suicidal behavior. Based on these findings, we propose an awareness creation and education on how to understand suicidal persons and their behavior more generally to facilitate the fight to decriminalize suicide attempts in Ghana. Madam Chair, I will now talk about a few studies we conducted on suicide and the media. One of the established risk factors for suicide is media reporting. The influence of the media in shaping attitudes towards suicide by individuals and groups of people has been documented in the literature. Numerous studies over the years have examined the impact of media reportage of suicide and suicidal behavior and have reported suicide contagion, or what we call copycat suicide, after the stories have been reported. However, findings have been inconsistent, and the link between suicide story and subsequent suicidal behavior is not a clear causal or direct link. Some studies have indicated that media reporting of suicide stories, particularly celebrity suicides, may trigger other suicides in vulnerable groups, including young people. However, the media can also play a powerful and critical role in educating the public about suicide prevention. Clinical and research experiences on working on suicidality in Ghana for close to a decade have shown that most media reports on suicide in Ghana are not guided by any specific guidelines, and if they are, it is possible that they are not compliant. Indeed, media reports on suicide stories in Ghana do not adhere to the established guidelines by WHO or the IASP. Madam Chair, in 2019, we examined the considerations that media editors observe in publishing suicide stories. We sampled authorities of selected media houses which have been noted for reporting suicide stories, media practitioners who have covered and edited stories on suicide and who were willing to be interviewed. Thematic analysis of the results showed that considerations for publishing suicide stories included deterrence, didacticism, celebritism, and ethics. These considerations generally reflect the double-edged role of the media in suicide prevention. On the one hand, the media is a partner in public health education, but on the other hand, the media's activities can be deleterious to all preventive efforts in public health education on suicide. It is important that the media adheres to the WHO or the IASP's guidelines for suicide reporting. Clearly, there is a need for training on these guidelines among media personnel. Having discussed the various studies we conducted on attitudes and views of different people towards suicide, it was deemed necessary to also explore the reasons why people attempt suicide. I will highlight 3 studies that focus on this theme. In this study, the study we can see on the screen right now, respondents were asked to give their reasons for attempting suicide. And the reasons they gave include 1, lack of support, abandonment, shame, existential struggles, and supernatural reasons. These findings point to social cultural factors in suicidal behavior and hence the need for the prevention of suicide and care for suicidal persons. Madam Chair, to understand the struggles that suicide attempters go through after the attempt and the role played by religion in the attempters' experiences, we conducted another study. This study is titled, I Have Seen, Understanding the Role of Religion in the Experiences of Suicide Attempters in Ghana. Findings from this study revealed that religion provided a broad context within which the informant's experiences could be understood. All informants acknowledge God as the owner of life and death, whereas the majority reacted to the suicidal act in the way that resonated with their religious system and sought for forgiveness from God. A few reacted in opposition to the system and expressed anger and disappointment in God. Here, we clearly see the role played by religion in the experiences of these persons who had attempted suicide. These findings suggest that we can work closely with religious leaders in our communities in any preventive efforts that we make. Madam Chair, one of the consequences of suicide attempt is the negative reactions from people in society. In Ghana, stigma against suicide and suicidal persons is so profound. For example, people refuse to name a child after the attempter or a person who died through suicide. They treat the family with stigma and criminally prosecute the attempter. These negative reactions may further expose the suicide attempter to traumatic experiences which could exacerbate their perturbation and lead to eventual death by suicide through the use of more lethal means. In a cultural setting that has harsh social attitudes and reactions towards suicide and suicidal persons such as Ghana, these reactions might further perturb the suicidal persons. In qualitative studies, we explore the motivations behind suicide and suicide attempts. Motivations for suicide behavior included social taunting, hopelessness, and partner's infidelity. Suicidal persons reported stigma expressed through physical molestation and social ostracism, which left them traumatized. Some participants, however, cope through social support from relations, religious faith, and the use of avoidance. The need for education on the reasons for suicide and for persons who are in suicidal crisis to be supported in our communities cannot be overemphasized. Madam Chair, when someone attempts suicide, how does the family experience the phenomenon, and how do they cope? Does the family and the attempter have similar reasons why the suicide was attempted? So in a study in 2017, we explored the reasons for suicidal behavior from the perspective of the attempt survivor and compared them with the views of their immediate family. The importance is to observe potential disparities and non-disparities in the narratives, which may reflect obliviousness in the part of the family in understanding what actual reasons for the suicide act is. Two major themes emerge after the analysis. One, similar reasons, where both the attempter and his or her family reported parallel reasons for the attempt. Then two, different reasons, where dissimilar reasons between the narratives of the attempters and family members with regards to the suicide attempt were mentioned. Arguably, survivor families have a very significant role to play in understanding suicide and in helping prevent suicide in our communities. Now, how do we put all this together? Madam Chair, so far, I have highlighted research that my research team and I have conducted over the years among various populations, including students, nurses, physicians, laypersons, the police, and many more. In a bid to understand the meanings of suicide in a cultural context, we studied attitudes both in the cultural and legal context, reasons and motivations for engaging in suicidal behavior, suicide and the law, and the experiences of persons who have attempted suicide and those of their families. We also explored the attitudes of the media and what considerations they make in reporting suicide. There are key learning points and understandings from these studies that help highlight the cultural understandings of suicide in Ghana. For example, suicide is culturally proscribed and legally criminalized in our country. Indeed, suicide transgresses the moral norms of our culture and threatens the existence of the community and is therefore considered a taboo. However, as suicide is a mental health issue, individuals who are suicidal need help. Criminalizing suicide attempt therefore makes people afraid of seeking help, and health institutions may not also be ready to offer the needed help. Consequently, suicidal persons suffer in secret without being offered any help. From these studies, it is observed that attitudes towards suicidal persons are largely negative, judgmental, and condemnatory. Specific attitudes include silencing, where no one is supposed to talk about suicide because it is perceived as a taboo. And two, trivialization of suicide, where people cannot accept any reason for engaging in suicidal behavior. Generally, such attitudes show a lack of understanding and knowledge of suicidal behavior. Madam Chair, one factor that seems to have a strong influence on the attitudes of respondents in our research is religion. Religion indeed plays a double-edged role in suicidal behavior. On the one hand, it protects the suicidal person by providing recovery resources. On the other hand, religion also makes attempters feel they have failed in utilizing their religious resources in the midst of their suicidal crisis, and this can make them feel bad and regret their act. Consequently, they may not seek the necessary support for their challenges. Madam Chair, suicide and suicide attempt can cause serious impacts such as emotional, physical, and economic problems. Suicidal behavior may also affect the health and well-being of the suicidal persons, as well as significant others, including families and loved ones. The need for efforts in preventing suicidal behavior can therefore not be overemphasized. Madam Chair, based on our research findings, we have collaborated over the years with both national and international organizations and interest groups on issues regarding suicide and suicide prevention. These collaborations are in the areas of training and advocacy that will benefit the public. We have embarked on training programs for various gatekeepers and others who work with persons who are suicidal. For example, we organize periodic workshops on suicide prevention for students, for media personnel, for the police, for judges, teachers and school counselors, community leaders, as queen mothers and religious leaders. We did this so as to help with suicide prevention in the country. What next? Madam Chair, to help prevent suicide, we as a country must make concerted efforts towards prevention. Suicide is preventable, and everyone has a role to play to save lives and to create strong and healthy individuals, families, and communities. In other words, suicide prevention is everyone's business. As a social and community psychologist, I propose the following as the way forward towards suicide prevention in Ghana. 1, we need to decriminalize suicide attempt, the law that criminalizes suicide. Efforts must be geared towards the decriminalization of suicide attempts. This is important as criminalizing suicide prevents persons in distress from seeking help and makes suicidal persons aim to complete the behavior. So in other words, they will make sure that they kill themselves, because if you don't die, you will be jailed. Additionally, it makes it difficult to have accurate statistics of suicidal behavior captured for intervention and planning purposes. Madam Chair, it is heartwarming to say that in June 2022, a stakeholders meeting on Criminal Offences Amendment Bill was held in Parliament. The law criminalizing suicide was part of this bill. This is a great initiative, and it is my hope that it will not be long before the law that criminalizes suicide attempt is repealed. 2, National Suicide Prevention Center. Considering that statistics on suicide and suicide attempts are poorly monitored in the country, the creation of a National Suicide Prevention Center will help collate information on all aspects of suicidal behavior. This information could then be used to plan effective suicide prevention programs for various populations in the country. Importantly, suicide prevention efforts require much coordination and collaboration among multiple sectors of society, including the health sector and other sectors such as education, the media, and many more. These efforts must be comprehensive and integrated, as no single approach can make a significant impact on an issue as complex as suicide. 3, awareness creation. We need to engage in more awareness creation regarding suicidal behavior. Suicide construed as a taboo implies that we cannot and should not talk about it, as there is the perception that when spoken about, many more people will engage in the behavior. However, this is only a myth. We must talk about suicide in a very preventative manner so as to help persons who are going through suicidal crisis. Awareness creation will also help others understand that suicide is preventable and that we all can contribute in one way or the other to prevent this behavior from escalating. 4, public health approach. There is the need to adopt a public health approach to suicide prevention. Using a public health approach implies that we focus on prevention and promotion of community-wide mental health. We must be each other's keeper and try as much as possible to link up persons who are in suicidal crisis with mental health professionals for support. And 5, the role of religious leaders. The role of religious leaders in the prevention of suicide cannot be overemphasized. They usually help provide support and hope to the persons who are in suicidal crisis, and they have also engaged, they have been part of some para-counseling for such persons. It is therefore important to strategically enroll them in an attempt to search for effective ways of preventing suicide in Ghana. We are all aware of the economic challenges the country is facing at the moment. The effect of these challenges is huge, and it touches on individuals, families, and communities at large. We all have the consequences of the financial challenges. It is hard for everyone, but I have a message for all of you. And my take-home message is that whatever situation you find yourself in, whatever challenges you are going through, remember that suicide is preventable. Remember that suicide is not an option. Talk to someone, seek help early, and know that there is hope. Indeed, hope is right here. I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge a few individuals and groups who have been very supportive to me over the years. In the first place, I would like to thank God Almighty for His mercies and how far He has brought me. I'm grateful to Professor Ernest Ayite, former Vice Chancellor, who saw something in me and appointed me first as the acting Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and later as Dean of the School of Social Sciences. My thanks also go to Professor Ebenezer Wisodro for working with him throughout his tenure as VC, and to Professor Nana Abba Apia Amfo, our current Vice Chancellor. I am most grateful for the opportunities you have given me to contribute my quota to the development of the University of Ghana. There are a few senior colleagues who have been very impactful throughout my journey as a lecturer. I just mentioned a few. Professor Osam, Kweku Osam, Professor Achuaye, Professor J. Mensah, Professor Alemna, Professor Opoku of blessed memory, Professor Fisher, blessed. There are a whole lot of them. I thank you all for imparting something in me. And my research team from Norway and Uganda, Professors Bite, Nizek, Heidi, Yermeland, and my colleagues and mentors, Professor Joseph Osafo, Professor Eugene Kinyanda, James Mugashi, Johnny Ando Atta, Emmanuel Kwashi, Winifred Asari Doku, and Jennifer Pepra. I acknowledge you all today. Our journey and goal of unraveling the meaning of suicide in a cultural context has been fruitful. Thank you all so much. To my colleagues at the Department of Psychology, I say thank you for all your support over the years. To Dr. Ando Atta and Dr. Kwashi and Dr. Adoteanum, and all others who assisted me in various ways to help organize this lecture, to put things in place, I say a big thank you. To my classmates in Kunya Secondary School, I'm sure they are here, and Kwando Secondary School, I say thank you for being there for me and always reminding me. And also to my year group, the Russian session of 1987 year group graduating class, I say thank you all for all the support. To my extended family, I cannot mention names, you know yourselves. I want to say I cherish you all. And to the blessed memory of my husband, my loving husband, who encouraged me so much. He pushed and pushed that I should publish and get here. And now I am here, but he did not live to see this. But I thank you so much for all the push. May you rest in peace. And my children, my big boys, I call them, thank you all for being there for me all these years. You have been my support and pillar over the years, and I do not know how I would have made it without you. The many years of living you here in Ghana while I pursued my education and career has been rewarded today. Thank you very much. And this lecture is also to the memory of my mom and dad, who are also of blessed memory. And to all persons who are going through some form of crisis, please, suicide is not an option. Ensure that you talk to somebody, get close to somebody, and you'll be given the right kind of help that you need. I thank you all so much for your time.